crystal chandelier trembled as Victoria Sterling drew her bow across the strings with a passion that had nothing to do with the Bach concerto on her music stand. The grand ballroom at the Metropolitan Hotel, with its marble columns and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline, had hosted countless charity galas, but never one where the violinist looked ready to declare war through music. Victoria adjusted her grip on the bow, her hand steady despite the frustration burning in her chest. 3 hours she had been playing background music for these society people who barely glanced her way, treating her like expensive furniture that happened to make pleasant sounds. The annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala was in full swing, with men in $1,000 tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds, all patting themselves on the back for their generous donations while sipping champagne that cost more than most. People's monthly rent. She launched into a particularly aggressive passage, pouring her irritation into every note. The music soared above the chatter and clinking glasses, demanding attention that most of the guests were too polite or too self-absorbed to give. Victoria had accepted this gig because she needed the money, pure and simple. Her rent was due next week, and her regular teaching income wouldn't cover both rent and groceries. Again, careful there, or you might actually make them listen. The voice came from directly behind her, low and amused. Victoria finished the phrase before turning, prepared to offer the same polite smile she had been wearing all evening. Instead, she found herself looking into the darkest eyes she had ever seen. Set in a face that belonged on magazine covers rather than in stuffy charity events, the man was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with black hair that looked like he had been running his fingers through it, and a smile that suggested he found most things in life quietly entertaining. His tuxedo fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body, and he wore it with the casual confidence of someone who had never worried about money a single day in his life. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, lowering her violin. "Did you need something?" Sebastian Knight, he extended a hand that she noticed was calloused along the fingertips. Musicians' hands. "And I was hoping you might play something that would actually wake these people up." Victoria ignored the offered handshake and studied his face. Knight. She knew that name. Knight Industries, the tech empire that had made headlines for revolutionizing everything from smartphones to electric cars. This man wasn't just wealthy, he was absurdly, impossibly wealthy. The challenge thrown down? "Let me guess," Victoria said, picking up her bow again. "You're bored with your own party and thought you'd come critique the help." Sebastian's laugh was rich and genuine. "Actually, I was thinking the opposite. I was wondering if the help might be willing to show these people what real music sounds like real music." Victoria's voice carried a sharp edge, as opposed to the fake music I've been playing for the last 3 hours. As opposed to the sanitized, inoffensive background noise that most hired musicians provide at events like this. Sebastian moved closer, and Victoria caught a hint of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Something warmer. "Are you practicing earlier? The Paganini piece?" "You play it like you understand what it means to struggle." The observation hit closer to home than Victoria cared to admit. She had been practicing Paganini's Caprice No. 24, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the violin repertoire, and she did know what it meant to struggle. She had been struggling her entire adult life. "I don't know what game you're playing, Mr. Knight, but I have a job to do." Victoria placed the violin under her chin, ready to return to her batch. "Guests expect pleasant background music, and that's what I'm paid to provide. What if I paid you to provide something else?" The question stopped her cold. Victoria lowered the violin and looked at him carefully. There was something in his expression that suggested he wasn't making a casual comment. "What do you mean?" "Mean," Sebastian said, his voice dropping lower. "What if I told you that half the people in this room have never heard music that actually moved them? What if I offered you the chance to change that?" The proposition, Victoria felt her heart rate increase, though she couldn't tell if it was from anger or excitement. "Are you suggesting I abandon my professional obligations to indulge your entertainment fantasies?" "I'm suggesting," Sebastian replied, his eyes never leaving hers, "that you stop hiding behind professional obligations and show these people what you're really capable of." The words hit her like a slap. Hiding. as if her years of training, her countless hours of practice, her careful cultivation of a professional reputation were all just elaborate ways of avoiding something. "You don't know anything about me," Victoria said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You don't know what I'm capable of, or what I'm hiding from. You're right." Sebastian stepped closer, and Victoria found herself backed against the piano. "I don't know anything about you except that you play like someone who has something to prove and nothing left to lose. I find that fascinating. It's fascinating enough to risk disrupting your fancy charity gala. It's fascinating enough to risk a lot more than that." The intensity in his voice made Victoria's breath catch. She looked around the ballroom, taking in the perfectly orchestrated scene. The ice sculptures gleaming under crystal chandeliers, the auction items displayed with museum-quality lighting, the carefully choreographed interactions between guests, who all seemed to know exactly where they belonged in this glittering hierarchy. "Want me to play something that might actually make them uncomfortable?" Victoria said slowly. "Something that might remind them that there's a world outside their perfect little bubble. I want you to play something that matters." Sebastian's voice was quiet but intense. "I want you to show them what music can be when it comes from the heart instead of from a contract." The moment of truth, Victoria studied his face, searching for signs of the game she was certain he must be playing. Rich men didn't approach working musicians with offers like this unless they wanted something. But Sebastian's expression remained serious, almost vulnerable. "And what do you get out of this?" she asked. "Maybe I get to see what happens when someone in this room actually feels something real for once." "Oh, nay, 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 nay." Sebastian glanced around the ballroom, with something that looked almost like distaste. "Maybe I get to remember what it feels like to witness something authentic." There was something in his voice that made Victoria pause, a weariness that didn't match his age, a cynicism that suggested he understood the emptiness of this world better than she had expected. "These are your people," Victoria pointed out. "Your guests, your charity, your world. These are my obligations." Sebastian corrected. "There's a difference." The distinction hung between them like a challenge. Victoria found herself studying this man more carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at the crowd, the careful distance he maintained from the other guests, even as he moved among them with practiced ease. "The decision, if I do this," Victoria said slowly, "if I play something real, something that might actually disturb their digestion. What happens when your mother starts getting complaints, when the charity questions your judgment, when the society pages write unflattering reviews? Then I deal with the consequences." Sebastian's answer came without hesitation. "But at least something honest will have happened in this room tonight." Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. For years, she had played it safe, accepting gigs like this one because they paid well and built her reputation among the right people. She had trained herself to be invisible, to provide beautiful background ambience without ever demanding real attention. It was a survival strategy that had served her well. But looking at Sebastian Knight, seeing the genuine challenge in his dark eyes, she felt that strategy crumbling. "One song," she said finally. "I choose what to play, and you don't interfere, regardless of the reaction." "Agreed. And if this backfires, if I lose future bookings because of this, you make it right." Sebastian's smile was slow and dangerous. "If this backfires, I'll personally ensure you never have to worry about bookings again." The promise carried weight that made Victoria's pulse quicken. She wasn't naive enough to think he was offering charity, but there was something in his tone that suggested he had resources she couldn't even imagine. "The performance begins." Victoria walked back to the center of the small performance area, heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had spent her entire career being careful, being appropriate, being forgettable. Tonight, she was going to be none of those things. She placed a different sheet of music on the stand, something she had been working on for months but had never performed publicly. It was her own arrangement of a traditional folk song, transformed into something that bridged classical technique with raw emotional power, something that demanded to be heard. The opening notes cut through the ballroom chatter like a blade. Victoria poured everything she had been holding back into the music. Every frustration about performing for people who saw her as decoration, every dream she had been too afraid to pursue, every moment of doubt about whether her talent would ever be enough. The conversations gradually died as the melody wove its spell through the room. This wasn't background music anymore. This was a force of nature, a storm of sound that refused to be ignored. Victoria felt the attention of the entire room focus on her like a spotlight, and instead of shrinking from it, she embraced it. She played like her life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Every note was a declaration of her worth, every phrase a refusal to be diminished or overlooked. The music built to impossible heights, demanding that everyone in the room acknowledge that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The aftermath when the last note faded into stunned silence. Victoria remained frozen in position, her bow still poised above the strings. The quiet stretched for what felt like an eternity before someone began to clap. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire ballroom erupted in applause that was nothing like the polite acknowledgement she had received earlier. Victoria finally lowered her violin and looked directly at Sebastian. He wasn't clapping, was staring at her with an expression that made her knees weak, something between amazement and hunger and recognition. As if he had been waiting his entire life to hear music like that. An elegant woman in emerald silk approached the performance area, her face tight with barely controlled displeasure. Helena Knight, Sebastian's mother and the evening's hostess, moved with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. "Miss Sterling," Helena said, her voice carrying across the no-quiet ballroom. "That was certainly ... unexpected." Victoria straightened her shoulders, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. "Music should be unexpected sometimes, Mrs. Knight. Otherwise, it's just noise." The response clearly wasn't what Helena had anticipated. Her carefully composed expression flickered for just a moment before settling back into polite disapproval. "Perhaps we might have a word," Helena continued, "about appropriate selections for future events." "Actually, Mother?" Sebastian's voice cut through the tension as he moved to stand beside Victoria. "I think Miss Sterling's selection was exactly what this evening needed. Something honest." The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Victoria felt the dynamic in the room shift as mother and son faced each other across an invisible battlefield. With her somehow standing at the center of it, "Sebastian," Helena's voice carried a warning. "We should discuss this privately." "We should," Sebastian agreed. "But first, I have something to ask Miss Sterling." He turned to Victoria, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Whatever he was about to say would change everything between them. "Victoria," Sebastian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent ballroom, "I have a proposition for you." Victoria felt every eye in the room fixed on her, waiting for her response to whatever impossible thing this billionaire was about to suggest. Her violin case seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in her hands as she realized that her answer would determine not just the rest of her evening, but possibly the rest of her life. "I'm listening," she said quietly, though her words carried clearly. In the hushed space, Sebastian smiled, and there was something both predatory and protective in the expression. "Come work for me." Victoria Sterling had expected many things when she agreed to Sebastian Knight's proposition. But standing in the marble foyer of the Knight family estate at 8 in the morning was not one of them. The mansion rose around her like a monument to wealth, all soaring ceilings and priceless artwork, but what struck her most was the silence. Even her footsteps seemed muffled by the thick Persian rugs that covered floors worth more than her entire apartment building. Miss Sterling. Helena Knight descended the curved staircase like a queen approaching her throne, dressed in cream silk that probably cost more than Victoria made in 6 months. Punctual. Sebastian appreciates punctuality in his employees. The word employees hit Victoria like a cold slap. During the 3 days since the charity gala, she had been trying to understand exactly what Sebastian had offered her. Personal musician, private performances, a salary that made her head spin. But Helena's tone made it clear how the family matriarch viewed her new position. "Mrs. Knight." Victoria kept her voice level. "Thank you for welcoming me into your home." Sebastian's home, technically, though I do oversee the household staff. Helena's smile was sharp as winter sunlight. "I trust you understand the..." expectations that come with performing for a family of our standing. Before Victoria could respond, the sound of piano music drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. The melody was complex, melancholy, played with a technical skill that made Victoria's breath catch. Chopin's Ballade No. 1, but interpreted with an emotional depth that spoke of real understanding. The hidden musician Sebastian, Helena said tightly, was supposed to be in his morning meetings. Victoria followed the sound through hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors until she found its source. The music room was smaller than the ballroom where they had met, but infinitely more intimate. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over gardens that belonged in a botanical magazine and the Steinway grand piano. In the center of the room was clearly the heart of the space. Sebastian sat at the bench with his back to the door, completely absorbed in the music. His suit jacket hung over a nearby chair, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. Victoria had seen him in his perfectly polished public persona, but this was different. This was a man lost in something he clearly loved. She leaned against the doorframe, not wanting to interrupt. The Chopin was technically perfect, but more than that, it was emotionally devastating. Sebastian played like someone who understood heartbreak from personal experience, who had lived through the kind of loss that Chopin had poured into this piece. When the last notes faded, Sebastian remained motionless for a moment before speaking without turning around. "I know you're there, Victoria. I can feel you listening." I didn't want to interrupt. Victoria stepped into the room, her violin case in hand. "That was beautiful. You never mentioned you were a pianist? Former pianist?" Sebastian finally turned to face her, and Victoria saw something raw in his expression. "I haven't played for anyone in almost 5 years, and I'm honored." Victoria moved closer to the piano, running her fingers along its polished surface. "This is a magnificent instrument. It was my grandmother's. She taught me when I was young. Before my father decided that music was an impractical hobby for the future head of Knight Industries." There was bitterness in Sebastian's voice, but also resignation. "I kept it mostly for nostalgia, and you maintain it perfectly. Keep it tuned. Obviously practice regularly." Victoria's observation made Sebastian's jaw tighten. "Sound like nostalgia. That sounds like hope." The real challenge before Sebastian could respond, Helena Knight appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel. "Sebastian, your father is waiting for you in the study. The Tokyo contracts require your immediate attention." "In a moment, mother." Sebastian stood from the piano bench, but his eyes remained fixed on Victoria. "Miss Sterling and I were discussing her performance schedule. About that." Helena stepped fully into the room, and Victoria felt the temperature drop several degrees. "I've been reviewing the calendar of upcoming events, the Whitmore wedding, the museum gala, the ambassador's reception. These occasions require a certain refinement." The implication was crystal clear. Victoria wasn't refined enough for the Knight family's social calendar. She felt her spine straighten automatically, the defensive posture she had perfected during years of being underestimated. "I assure you, Mrs. Knight, I have performed at events of similar caliber." "I'm sure you have, dear." Helena's smile could have cut glass. "But our family's reputation requires performers with impeccable breeding as well as talent. Bloodlines matter in our circles." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Victoria felt her temper flare, the same anger that had driven her performance at the charity gala. But before she could respond, Sebastian's voice cut through the tension. "Mother Victoria will be performing exactly what I ask her to perform when I ask her to perform it."
Ow!
Her breeding is irrelevant. Her talent speaks for itself. The confrontation between mother and son crackled with years of accumulated tension. Victoria found herself caught between them, suddenly understanding that this was about much more than her employment. "Sebastian," Helena said carefully, "we should discuss this privately." "We should discuss a lot of things privately," Sebastian replied, "but not this." Victoria stays. Unexpected allies, this standoff was interrupted by the arrival of James Hartford, who burst into the music room with the energy of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Tall and blonde, with the kind of confident smile that suggested he had never met a problem he couldn't charm his way out of, James moved like a man accustomed to being welcome everywhere. Bastian, hiding from your own business meetings. James clapped Sebastian on the shoulder with familiar ease. Your assistant is having a nervous breakdown trying to reschedule the Tokyo call. James, meet Victoria Sterling. Victoria, this is James Hartford, my oldest friend, and current pain in the neck. Hey. James turned his attention to Victoria. She saw his expression change as he took in her violin case and the tension in the room. Ah, the violinist from the charity gala. Heard you caused quite a stir. Sterling was just leaving, Helena said firmly. Actually, James said with a grin that spelled trouble, I was hoping to hear her play. Word is spreading about your performance the other night. The Whitmore family specifically requested you for their daughter's wedding. Victoria felt a surge of surprise and pride. The Whitmores were old money, the kind of family whose approval could make a musician's career. They requested me specifically? Apparently, young Amanda Whitmore was at the charity gala and told her mother that you were the only musician she's ever heard who made her feel like crying and dancing at the same time. James's grin widened. Not bad for one night's work. Growing connection, Helena's expression had shifted from disapproval to calculation. If the Whitmores wanted Victoria, then perhaps her presence in the Knight household wasn't the disaster she had assumed. Well, Helena said slowly, I suppose. We should discuss Miss Sterling's calendar in more detail. As Helena swept from the room to make phone calls, James whistled low. Nicely played. Both of you. He looked between Sebastian and Victoria with knowing eyes. I have to ask, Bastian, since when do you hire musicians for private performances? Since I heard Victoria play, Sebastian said simply. Great. James's grin became positively wicked. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that you haven't stopped talking about her since Tuesday. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks as Sebastian shot his friend a warning look. James, what? I'm just observing that you seem unusually invested in your new employee's success. James turned to Victoria. Has he shown you his own musical talents yet? Our Sebastian here could have been a concert pianist if he hadn't been born into corporate royalty. James, Sebastian's voice, carried real warning now. Relax. I'm just saying that you two have more in common than you might think. James checked his watch and headed toward the door. Speaking of which, your father is going to send a search party if you don't appear in that study within the next 5 minutes. Alone together after James left, Sebastian and Victoria found themselves alone in the music room for the first time since the charity gala. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and possibilities. Right, you know, Victoria said finally. You could have been a professional musician. Could have been a lot of things. Sebastian moved to the window, looking out over the perfectly manicured gardens. But being Sebastian Knight, heir to Knight Industries, doesn't leave much room for could-have-ens. Could if you made room for them. Sebastian turned to look at her, and Victoria saw something vulnerable in his expression. Is that what you did? Made room for what you wanted? I made room for what I needed to survive, Victoria corrected. There's a difference. And what do you need to survive now? The question was loaded with implications that made Victoria's heart race. She could feel the dangerous current running between them, the same electricity that had sparked at the charity gala. But now they were alone, without the buffer of crowds or public expectations. I need to understand what I'm really doing here, Victoria said carefully. Because your job offer, your mother's disapproval, your friend's comments about you. Not stopping talking about me, none of it feels like a simple employment arrangement. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. You're right, it's not simple at all. Confession, then, what is it? Sebastian moved closer, and Victoria found herself backing toward the piano until the bench caught her legs. It's me trying to figure out how to keep you in my life without scaring you away. The admission hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had been prepared for games, for the kind of casual pursuit that wealthy men sometimes engaged in when they encountered something novel. She hadn't been prepared for honesty. Sebastian, you don't even know me. I know that you play like someone who understands pain. I know that you'd rather fail honestly than succeed by compromising your integrity. I know that you make me want to be the person I was before I learned to hide everything that mattered to me." His voice dropped too barely, above a whisper. "And I know that I haven't been able to think about anything else since I heard you play." Victoria felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "This is complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Your mother hates me. My mother hates anyone who threatens her control over my life. I threaten her control. Sebastian's." The smile was soft and dangerous. "Victoria, you threaten everything about the life I thought I wanted." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they were brave enough to cross. Victoria looked into Sebastian's dark eyes and saw her own reflection there, saw the same mixture of fear and longing that she felt churning in her chest. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now," Sebastian said, reaching up to cup her face in his hands, "we find out if we're brave enough to want the same impossible things." Before Victoria could respond, before she could think of all the reasons this was a terrible idea, Sebastian kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, giving her time to pull away. But when she didn't, when she instead stepped closer and kissed him back, something ignited between them that made the rest of the world disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria knew that whatever happened next, there was no going back to the simple musician and client relationship they had pretended to establish. "Your father is waiting," she said breathlessly. "Let him wait," Sebastian replied, his forehead resting against hers. "This is more important." Outside the music room, the sounds of the Knight household continued around them. But inside their small bubble of possibility, Victoria Sterling and Sebastian Knight stood on the edge of something that would change both their lives forever. 2 weeks had passed since Victoria's first kiss with Sebastian in the music room, and the Knight household had become a battlefield disguised as domestic tranquility. Helena Knight watched Victoria's every move with the intensity of a hawk studying prey, while Richard Knight, Sebastian's father, seemed genuinely pleased with the musical atmosphere his son's new employee had brought to their home. The contradiction left Victoria feeling like she was walking a tightrope over an abyss. Tonight would determine everything. The Knight Industries' annual shareholders' meeting was the most important event on the company calendar, where billion-dollar deals were made, and Sebastian's leadership would be scrutinized by investors from around the world. Helena had insisted that the evening's entertainment reflect the company's prestige and stability. She had specifically requested classical pieces that would demonstrate sophistication without risking any artistic surprises. Victoria stood in the estate's grand ballroom, now transformed into an elegant reception space, tuning her violin while servers made final preparations. Crystal glasses caught the light from chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. The guest list read like a who's who of global finance and technology. This wasn't just a performance, it was Sebastian's public test of whether bringing Victoria into his world had been brilliant or catastrophic. Nervous, James Hartford appeared beside her, looking immaculate in his navy tuxedo. Over the past 2 weeks, he had become an unexpected ally, someone who seemed to understand the impossible position Victoria found herself in. Terrified, Victoria admitted, "Your friend has put me in an interesting situation. Sebastian has a talent for that." James glanced around the ballroom, taking in the arriving guests. "Though between you and me, I've never seen him take risks like this before. You've changed something in him." "I haven't changed anything. It's been myself." "Exactly." James's expression grew serious. "And being yourself around Sebastian Knight is the most dangerous thing you could do." Secrets revealed before Victoria could ask what he meant, Sebastian appeared at her side. He looked every inch the powerful CEO in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo. But Victoria had learned to read the subtle signs of tension in his shoulders, the way his smile became more controlled when he was managing stress. "Ready for this?" he asked quietly. "Ready to play for 300 people who will judge every note? Ready to represent your company's cultural sophistication? Ready to prove that your decision to hire me wasn't a mistake?" Victoria kept her voice light, but they both heard the real questions underneath. "Ready to show them who you really are," Sebastian corrected. "Nothing more, nothing less." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a woman Victoria had never seen before. Tall and elegant with platinum blonde hair and the kind of bone structure that belonged in fashion magazines. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. "Sebastian?" The woman's voice was warm, honey over steel. "I was hoping to catch you before the presentation begins." Victoria felt Sebastian's posture change beside her, tension radiating from him like heat. "I wasn't expecting you. Your mother invited me. She thought it would be nice for us to reconnect now that my divorce is finalized." Vivian's smile was perfect, practiced. "It has been 3 years since we've had a proper conversation." The name clicked into place for Victoria. Vivian Ashworth, formerly Vivian Knight, Sebastian's ex-wife, the woman he had married at 26 and divorced 2 years. Later in what the business press had called one of the most expensive separations in corporate history. "Vivian, this is Victoria Sterling." "Victoria, my ex-wife, Vivian." Victoria felt like she'd been sucker punched. Sebastian had never mentioned being married, let alone divorced. She extended her hand with professional courtesy while her mind raced through the implications. "Violinist," Vivian said, her handshake firm and assessing. "Helena mentioned you've been staying here. How lovely that Sebastian is supporting the arts. The performance of a lifetime." The barbed comment made Victoria's jaw clench. But before she could respond, the lights dimmed and Helena's voice carried across the ballroom, introducing the evening's entertainment. Victoria found herself walking to the performance area on unsteady legs, her mind reeling from Vivian's sudden appearance and the realization that Sebastian had been hiding major parts of his history. She positioned herself beside the piano where Sebastian would join her for their planned duet, a piece they had been rehearsing every morning for the past week. But when she looked for him in the crowd, she saw him trapped in conversation with Vivian and a group of board members, his expression unreadable. The opening notes of their planned piece died in Victoria's throat as she realized Sebastian wasn't coming. Whether by choice or circumstance, she was on her own in front of the most important audience of her career, representing a man whose past she apparently knew nothing about. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her, and she remembered something Sebastian had said during one of their morning practice sessions. "Real musicians don't need safety nets. They create their own wings while they're falling." Victoria closed her eyes, pushed the prepared music aside, and began to play from her heart. The truth emerges, the piece that emerged wasn't anything from the classical repertoire. It was pure improvisation. A musical autobiography that told the story of a girl who had grown up with nothing but determination and talent, who had fought for every opportunity and earned every success through sheer will. The melody spoke of loneliness and ambition, of dreams deferred and chances taken, of the particular kind of courage required to stand alone in rooms full of people who had been born into advantages she could only imagine. As the music built, Victoria opened her eyes and found Sebastian's gaze across the crowded room. He had stopped pretending to listen to Vivian and the board members. His entire attention was focused on her. And in his expression she saw recognition, understanding, and something that looked like awe. The piece evolved, becoming a conversation between her dreams and his, between her independence and his obligations, between the life she had built for herself and the world he represented. She played her fears about not being good enough, her anger at being judged by her background rather than her talent, her confusion about falling for a man whose life was so far removed from her own experience. And then, as the melody reached its emotional climax, something unexpected happened. Sebastian excused himself from his conversation and walked to the piano. Without a word, he sat down and joined her improvisation, adding harmonies that supported and elevated her melody without overwhelming it. Together, they created something neither of them could have achieved alone. The music became a dialogue between two people finding their way toward each other across the vast distance between their worlds. Sebastian's piano spoke of duty and expectation, of dreams sacrificed for family obligations, of the loneliness that came with inherited power. Victoria's violin answered with themes of resilience and hope, of the beauty that could emerge from struggle, of the courage required to risk everything for love. The decision, when the last notes faded into silence, the ballroom remained completely quiet for several heartbeats. Then the applause began, but it was different from the polite acknowledgement Victoria had grown accustomed to. This was the sound of 300 people who had been genuinely moved, who had witnessed something real and beautiful and unexpected. Helena Knight stood at the edge of the performance area, her expression unreadable. Vivian watched from across the room with something that might have been surprise or calculation. The board members exchanged glances that suggested they were seeing Sebastian in a new light. But Victoria only had eyes for Sebastian, who stood from the piano bench and walked to her with purpose. In front of 300 guests, in front of his ex-wife and his parents and the most powerful people in his professional world, he took her hands in his. That, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, was the most honest thing that has happened in this house in years. Sebastian, Helena's voice carried a warning. Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately. No, Mother. Sebastian's voice was calm but final. I'm done having private conversations about my life. He turned back to Victoria, his dark eyes intense. I have something to ask you, and I want to ask it here, in front of everyone who matters to me. Victoria felt her heart stop, round them. The gathered guests had gone completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. Victoria Sterling, Sebastian said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. For the past month, you have challenged everything I thought I knew about myself. You've made me remember who I was before I learned to be who everyone expected me to be. You've shown me what it means to choose courage over comfort. The leap of faith. Victoria's hands trembled in his as she realized where this was leading. Sebastian, what are you doing? I'm choosing you, he said simply, over my mother's expectations, over the safe path, over the life I thought I was supposed to want. I'm choosing the woman who plays like her heart is on fire and who isn't impressed by anything except authenticity. The declaration sent ripples of shock through the gathered crowd. Victoria heard Helena's sharp intake of breath, saw Vivian's expression shift from calculation to genuine surprise. But all of that faded into background noise as she focused on Sebastian's face. You're choosing me over Knight Industries? Victoria's voice was barely audible. Over your family's approval? Over everything you've worked for? I'm choosing happiness over obligation, Sebastian corrected. I'm choosing a future I want to build instead of one that was built for me, and I'm hoping you'll choose it with me. Victoria felt tears she hadn't expected gathering in her eyes. Sebastian, I can't ask you to give up your life for me. You're not asking, I'm offering. His thumbs brushed away the tears that had started to fall. Victoria, I would rather spend one day being completely myself with you than spend the rest of my life being who everyone else needs me to be without you. The new beginning around them. The ballroom buzzed with whispered conversations and barely contained excitement. This wasn't just a personal declaration. It was a public revolution in the carefully ordered world of the Knight family empire. About the company, Victoria asked. Your responsibilities? I'll figure it out. Sebastian's answer was immediate. We'll figure it out together. But I'm done making decisions based on fear and obligation. I'm done hiding who I am because it might make other people uncomfortable. Victoria looked into his eyes and saw her own future reflected there. Not the safe, predictable future she had been building for herself, but something bigger and more terrifying and infinitely more beautiful. A future where her music would matter, where she would be valued for exactly who she was, where love would be more important than social standing or financial security. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely insane, Sebastian agreed. Your mother will never forgive us. She'll adjust or she won't. That's her choice. The business world will have opinions. Let them talk. Victoria looked around the ballroom one more time, taking in the faces of people who represented everything she had never had and had never thought she wanted. Then she looked back at Sebastian and saw the only thing that actually mattered. Ask. Me, she said quietly. Ask you what? Whatever you were going to ask me before you got distracted by all the reasons it might be impossible. Sebastian's smile was radiant as he dropped to one knee right there in the center of the ballroom. In front of 300 witnesses and his family and his ex-wife and everyone who had ever had an opinion about how Sebastian Knight should live his life. Victoria Sterling, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room. Will you marry me and help me build a life that's worth living? The question hung in the air like the final note of a perfect symphony. Victoria looked down at the man who had challenged her to be brave, who had chosen her over everything safe and expected, who was offering her a future she had never dared to dream of. "Yes," she said, and her voice rang clear and strong through. "The ballroom? Yes, I will." The applause that erupted was thunderous, but Victoria barely heard it. She was too busy kissing the man who had stipended both their worlds for the chance at something real and beautiful and completely unprecedented. Later, as the guests gradually departed and the ballroom slowly emptied, Victoria and Sebastian sat together at the piano, playing soft melodies while the reality of their new future settled around them like stardust. "No regrets?" Sebastian asked, his fingers dancing over the keys while Victoria's violin provided a gentle counter-melody. "Only one," Victoria replied. "What's that?" Victoria smiled, looking out over the gardens where moonlight painted everything silver. "I regret that it took us so long to be brave enough to want the impossible." Sebastian's laughter mixed with the music, and somewhere in the distance, Helena Knight was probably planning how to manage the media storm that would follow her son's engagement to a violinist from nowhere. But in the music room, surrounded by the sound of their combined talents and the promise of their shared future, Victoria Sterling and Sebastian Knight played on, creating something beautiful from the chaos they had chosen together.